The summer heat hung thick over the Carrier Dome in Syracuse, New York, on August 13, 1984. 40,000 bodies packed into the arena, their collective energy vibrating through the concrete and steel structure like a living organism. The stage lights dimmed, and the opening notes of Unchained tore through the darkness with a ferocity that made the floor shake. Van Halen had arrived at the peak of their powers, riding the unstoppable wave of their 1984 album, the record that had given the world Jump, Panama, and Hot for Teacher. They were untouchable. They were gods. But what happened that night would expose the fractures in their seemingly impenetrable fortress, revealing a darkness that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Eddie Van Halen stood stage left, his famous Frankenstrat guitar, that iconic red, white, and black striped instrument, slung low across his body. His fingers moved across the fretboard with the kind of supernatural precision that had made him the most imitated guitarist on the planet. But those watching closely, those who knew Eddie beyond the myth, could see something was wrong. His eyes, usually closed in transcendent concentration during solos, were open and darting, searching for something, or perhaps trying to escape from something. The sweat pouring down his face wasn't just from the stage lights and the August heat. It was the sweat of a man fighting a battle no one else could see. Before we dive deeper into what happened that night, if you're fascinated by the untold stories behind rock's greatest legends, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you the hidden truths, the backstage dramas, and the human stories behind the icons who defined our generation. The 1984 tour had been a triumph beyond anything Van Halen had experienced before. The album had gone quintuple platinum, spawning hits that dominated both rock and pop radio, a crossover success that was almost unheard of for a hard rock band at the time. MTV played their videos in constant rotation. Jump had hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, something no previous Van Halen song had achieved. They were selling out arenas in hours, sometimes minutes. But success, as Eddie was discovering, came with a price that couldn't be measured in record sales or sold-out shows. The tension between Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth had been building for years, but by the summer of 1984, it had reached a breaking point. These weren't just creative differences or ego clashes between bandmates. This was a fundamental incompatibility between two men who saw the world and Van Halen's place in it through completely different lenses. Eddie was the architect, the obsessive craftsman who spent countless hours in his home studio, chasing the perfect tone, the perfect riff, the perfect song. Music was his religion, his therapy, his entire reason for existence. David Lee Roth, on the other hand, was the showman, the ringmaster, the flamboyant frontman who understood that rock and roll was as much about spectacle and personality as it was about the music itself. During rehearsals for the Syracuse show, Eddie had been increasingly withdrawn. His brother Alex, the band's drummer and Eddie's lifelong companion and protector, had noticed the change. Eddie was drinking more, vodka mostly, straight from the bottle between songs during rehearsals. The alcohol had always been there, a constant presence since the early days. But now it seemed less like recreation and more like medication. Alex tried to talk to him, but Eddie would just shake his head and say everything was fine, then turn back to his guitar, adjusting and readjusting the settings on his amplifiers, searching for something that seemed perpetually just out of reach. The real issue, though nobody was saying it out loud, was control. David Lee Roth had always been the face of Van Halen, the personality that sold the band to the masses. His acrobatic stage moves, his cocky swagger, his verbal gymnastics in interviews. All of it made him instantly recognizable. The perfect rock star for the MTV generation. But Eddie was the heart, the soul, the musical genius who made everything work. And increasingly, Eddie felt like his contributions were being overshadowed by Roth's showmanship. The songs Eddie poured his soul into were being reduced to background music for Roth's antics. That night in Syracuse started like any other show on the tour. The band tore through their set list with practiced precision. Unchained, Hot for Teacher, Runnin' with the Devil. The crowd was electric, feeding off the band's energy and throwing it back tenfold. But during Ice Cream Man, a song that featured Eddie playing acoustic guitar while Roth engaged the crowd with his showman's patter, something inside Eddie finally snapped. Roth was in the middle of one of his trademark improvisations, bantering with the crowd, when he made a joke, a throwaway line that probably seemed innocent to everyone in the arena except Eddie. "You know," Roth said, flashing his megawatt smile, "people always ask me what it's like working with the world's greatest guitar player, and I always tell them, I'll let you know when I finally meet him." The crowd laughed. They thought it was part of the show, another example of Diamond Dave's legendary wit and self-deprecating humor. But Eddie stopped playing. His hands, which moments before had been coaxing gentle melodies from his acoustic guitar, fell to his sides. The sudden silence was jarring, a vacuum where music should have been. Alex, sensing something was wrong, kept the beat going, trying to fill the gap, hoping Eddie would rejoin. Michael Anthony, the bassist, looked over at Eddie with concern etched across his face. But Eddie was done. He carefully set his guitar down on its stand, turned away from the microphone, and started walking toward the wings. 40,000 people watched in confused silence as Eddie Van Halen, the man they had paid to see, the guitar virtuoso who had redefined what was possible on 6 strings, simply left the stage in the middle of a song. The walk seemed to take forever, each step deliberate, measured, final. The stage lights illuminated him as he moved through the darkness, and for a moment, he looked like a ghost, a specter of the rock god everyone believed him to be, fading into the shadows. David Lee Roth stood at center stage, microphone in hand, watching his bandmate disappear into the wings. For perhaps the first time in his career, Roth was speechless. The arena had fallen into an eerie quiet, broken only by confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. Alex's drums had stopped. Michael's bass had gone silent. The show, for all intents and purposes, was over. But David Lee Roth hadn't become one of rock's greatest frontmen by wilting under pressure. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Roth stepped forward, his trademark smile returning to his face, though those close to the stage could see it didn't quite reach his eyes. He raised the microphone to his lips, and what he said next would become part of Van Halen lore, repeated and debated by fans for decades to come. "Well, folks," Roth began, his voice carrying that familiar mix of bravado and charm, "looks like our guitar player decided he needed a little break. Can't say I blame him. It's hot as hell up here, and that Frankenstrat is a heavy piece of wood." The crowd laughed nervously, unsure whether this was part of the show or something more serious. Roth continued, pacing the stage like a caged panther. "You know, being a genius is hard work. All those notes, all that perfection. It's exhausting. Sometimes a genius needs to step away and let the rest of us mere mortals handle things for a while." The words were delivered with Roth's characteristic humor, but there was an edge to them, a sharpness that cut through the arena like a blade. Alex, still sitting behind his drum kit, felt his stomach drop. He knew his brother, knew how those words would land. Michael Anthony looked toward the wings, hoping to see Eddie returning, but there was only darkness. "Tell you what," Roth said, his smile widening. "Why don't we continue this party? Because that's what Van Halen does. We give you a show, no matter what. Alex, Mike, let's give these beautiful people what they came for." And with that, Roth launched into "Everybody Wants Some," an a cappella intro that he often performed. His voice filled the arena, and slowly, hesitantly, Alex and Michael joined in, creating a stripped-down version of the song without Eddie's guitar. But something fundamental had broken. The audience could feel it. This wasn't the Van Halen they had paid to see. This was a band in crisis, performing without its heart, going through the motions because the show must go on. Some fans near the front of the stage later reported that they could see crew, members rushing around backstage, the shadowy figures moving frantically in the wings. Something serious was happening, something that went beyond typical rock star drama. While Roth entertained the crowd, a different kind of chaos was unfolding backstage. Eddie had walked directly to the band's dressing room, grabbed a bottle of vodka, and locked himself inside. Tour manager Noel Monk, a veteran of countless rock tours who had seen every kind of backstage drama imaginable, found himself confronting a situation he wasn't prepared for. The most essential member of one of the world's biggest rock bands had abandoned a sold-out show and was now refusing to come out of a locked room. Monk knocked on the door, his voice calm but urgent. "Eddie, we've got 40,000 people out there. Whatever's going on, we can deal with it after the show. But right now, we need you on that stage." There was no response. Monk tried again, his tone more pleading. "Eddie, talk to me. What do you need? What can we do?" Still nothing. Alex left his drum kit, a rare occurrence during any Van Halen show, and made his way backstage. The band was performing without him, just Roth and Anthony creating a makeshift acoustic performance that was buying time but couldn't last long. When Alex reached the dressing room, he didn't knock. "Eddie, it's me. Open the door." There was a long pause, then the sound of the lock clicking. Alex slipped inside and closed the door behind him. What transpired in that dressing room has never been fully revealed. Alex Van Halen, fiercely protective of his younger brother, has kept the details private even decades later. But those who were close to the door reported hearing raised voices, not in anger, but in anguish. They heard Eddie's voice, usually so measured and quiet off stage, saying things about respect, about being treated like a trained monkey, about being tired of playing second fiddle to Roth's ego. They heard Alex's voice, calm and steady, trying to talk his brother down, trying to remind him of their journey from Amsterdam to Pasadena, from garage band to arena headliners. Meanwhile, on stage, the makeshift performance was falling apart. Roth had exhausted his solo repertoire and was running out of ways to stall. The crowd, initially amused and understanding, was growing restless. Some were beginning to boo. Others were chanting, "Eddie, Eddie, Eddie," demanding the return of their guitar hero. The situation was rapidly approaching a point of no return. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, Eddie emerged from the dressing room. His eyes were red, whether from tears or alcohol or both. Nobody was quite sure. Alex was beside him, one hand on his brother's shoulder, guiding him back toward the stage. Eddie's guitar tech quickly handed him the Frankenstrat, and without a word, Eddie walked back into the lights. The crowd erupted when they saw him. The boos and chants transformed instantly into a deafening roar of approval. Eddie stepped up to his microphone stand, slung his guitar strap over his shoulder, and looked out at the sea of faces. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just began to play. The notes that came out of his amplifier were different from anything he'd played earlier in the show. They were raw, angry, full of pain and frustration. It wasn't a song from their set list. It was pure improvisation, Eddie channeling everything he was feeling through his fingers and into the instrument that had been his constant companion since childhood. The sound was ferocious, beautiful, heartbreaking. For nearly 10 minutes, he played a solo that was part catharsis, part revelation, part goodbye. Roth stood at the front of the stage, silent for once, watching his bandmate pour his soul out through his guitar. Alex and Michael joined in, creating a musical foundation for Eddie's emotional outpouring. The crowd stood transfixed, witnessing something they instinctively understood was special, unrepeatable, a moment of raw honesty in a world of carefully crafted rock star images. When Eddie finally brought the solo to a close, landing on a sustained note that seemed to hang in the air forever before fading to silence, the arena exploded in applause. But Eddie didn't acknowledge it. He looked at Roth, and for a moment, their eyes met. In that exchange, without a single word being spoken, both men understood something fundamental had changed. The band that took the stage that night in Syracuse was not the same band that would leave it. Van Halen finished the show, running through their remaining songs with professional competence, but none of the joy and energy that had characterized the earlier part of the tour. The encore was perfunctory, the goodbyes to the crowd mechanical. When they finally left the stage for the last time that night, Eddie headed straight for the tour bus without stopping to shower or change. He sat alone in the darkness, his guitar across his lap, while the rest of the band and crew dealt with the post-show breakdown. The Syracuse incident, as it would come to be known among those in the Van Halen inner circle, wasn't the end of the band, not immediately. They continued the 1984 tour, playing out their remaining dates with varying degrees of success, but the damage had been done. The facade of brotherhood and unity had cracked, and everyone could see the fault lines beneath. In the months that followed, the relationship between Eddie and Roth deteriorated further. Recording sessions for what would have been their next album became battlegrounds. Eddie wanted to explore a more keyboard-driven sound, to experiment with synthesizers and production techniques that went beyond traditional rock arrangements. Roth wanted to keep Van Halen firmly rooted in the hard rock party anthems that had made them famous. Neither man was willing to compromise. The breaking point came in 1985 when David Lee Roth announced he was leaving Van Halen to pursue a solo career. The official story was mutual agreement, a friendly parting of ways. The reality was far messier. Eddie felt betrayed, abandoned by the singer who had been with him since the beginning. Roth felt stifled, creatively limited by Eddie's increasingly controlling approach to the band's music. Both were right. Both were wrong. What happened in Syracuse that August night wasn't just a moment of rock star drama. It was a window into the complex dynamics that had always existed within Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen was never comfortable with fame. The immigrant kid who had been bullied for not speaking English, who had found refuge in music when the world seemed hostile and unwelcoming, never truly adjusted to being worshipped by millions. The stage fright, the social anxiety, the need for alcohol to cope with the pressure, all of it was there from the beginning, hidden beneath the virtuoso performances. David Lee Roth, conversely, was born for the spotlight. He thrived on attention, fed off the energy of crowds, lived for the moments when all eyes were on him. His confidence wasn't false. It was genuine, a core part of who he was. But that confidence sometimes manifested as insensitivity to the struggles of those around him, particularly someone as introspective and troubled as Eddie. Years later, in interviews and autobiographies, both Eddie and Roth would talk about the 1984 tour, but their recollections of specific events often differed dramatically. Roth remembered Syracuse as a minor incident, a momentary conflict resolved quickly and professionally. Eddie rarely spoke about it at all, but when pressed, he described it as one of the lowest points of his career, a night when he felt so disrespected and devalued that walking away seemed like the only option. The truth, as is often the case, probably lies somewhere between their two perspectives. What happened in Syracuse was both a minor incident and a major turning point. It was both quickly resolved and permanently damaging. It was the moment when the internal conflicts that had been manageable became unmanageable, when the relationship that had created some of rock's greatest music began its inevitable collapse. The Carrier Dome show on August 13, 1984, has taken on mythical status among Van Halen fans. Bootleg recordings of the concert, both audio and video, have circulated for years, analyzed and discussed in online forums and fan communities. Those recordings show a band at the peak of their technical powers, but also capture the tension underlying everything. You can hear it in Eddie's playing, the moments of brilliance punctuated by flashes of anger. You can see it in Roth's interactions with the crowd, the forced smile, the overcompensation. The 40,000 people who attended that show in Syracuse witnessed something rare and significant. They saw the moment when one of rock's greatest partnerships began to unravel in real time. They saw Eddie Van Halen, arguably the greatest guitarist of his generation, reach his breaking point and choose his dignity over the show. They saw Lee Roth, one of rock's greatest frontmen, face a crisis and respond with the only tools he had: humor, confidence, and an unshakable belief in the power of performance. When Eddie Van Halen died on October 6, 2020, after a long battle with cancer, the tributes poured in from around the world. Musicians, fans, and critics all celebrated his contributions to rock music, his revolutionary guitar techniques, his influence on generations of players. But perhaps the truest measure of Eddie's legacy isn't in the techniques he invented or the songs he wrote, but in that moment in Syracuse when he chose authenticity over artifice, when he decided that being true to himself was more important than giving the crowd what they expected. The Syracuse incident stands as a reminder that behind every legendary band, behind every iconic performance, are human beings with their own struggles, insecurities, and needs. The 40,000 people who came to see Van Halen that night wanted to witness rock gods performing miracles. What they actually witnessed was more valuable and more real. They saw the moment when a man decided that his self-respect mattered more than their entertainment, when artistic integrity trumped commercial obligation. Eddie Van Halen's walk off that Syracuse stage wasn't a failure or a breakdown. It was an assertion of personhood, a declaration that even rock gods have limits, that even guitar virtuosos have breaking points. And Lee Roth's response, for all its showmanship and ego, was an acknowledgement that the show must go on, that professional obligations matter, that sometimes you have to paper over the cracks and deliver what you promised, even when everything is falling apart behind the scenes. Both men were right. Both men were wrong. Both men were human. And that, ultimately, is what makes the Syracuse incident so compelling and so tragic.